Storm of Blood and Steel =RK Part 3. Republic Cruiser Requiem, Task Force Retribution Flagship. Skywalker. Guide the SAR bird to Ahsoka and then get your ass back to the Requiem. We still have clankers to deal with, I snapped into my comm. Ever since the threat of the massive vulture wave had passed, he had been frantically calling for someone to rescue the kid. It was getting irritating, and even besides that, the moment I noticed that she was shot down, I had sent a shuttle to retrieve landing in the Requiem. I took the scenic route, so to speak, noting the state of my capital ships. It was a bloody disaster. I didn't really believe that the damn vultures would be a major threat if it wasn't for those never sufficiently damned exposed bridges. I was wrong. 2/3 of my fleet was stripped off its heavy guns, and had its armor either weakened or shattered. How the hell the damn fighters had managed to blow up the Undran, I'll never know. I thought about my remaining forces. There were at least a few escorts that would do what I ordered them to do without screwing it up. And the Requiem, while missing a third of her weapons, was still combat capable. Further, I had one intact dreadnought as well as Conviction and Coruscant's Pride, which were virtually untouched aside from the total loss of their bridges and command staff. That left those two Venottas in interesting positions. They no longer had nav computers or central control, but still could fight. If not all that well. There was no one left to coordinate their weapons. But if their engineering received coordinates from another ship, they could still jump. Before reaching the CIC, I ordered recall for what remained of Hammer. I went next to Palion, who was examining the fleet's status report. After the Relentless lost its bridge, command of the fleet had went to the Commodore, at least until Yularen, who had thankfully survived, could make his way here. "We took a hammering, sir," stated Gilad. "That we did," I said, studying the fleet's status for a few seconds. I had a very rough plan in place. I want the 3 Guardian-equipped acclimators as well as escorts to jump at maximum missile range of those 2 battleships. Their targets are the remaining vultures. Our surviving torrents will support them. Once what's left of our bombers rearm aboard of this ship, we'll execute a tactical jump and cover them while they attack the battleships. When the heavy guns of those behemoths are gone, they will be easy to take down. "Sir. General Kenobi hailing us," spoke the lieutenant manning the comm station. "Patch him through," answered Palion. The image on one of the screens, which was showing a camera feed, was replaced by Obi-Wan and Cody, who had mostly recovered from the crash. My fellow general's face was grim. "I'm glad to see you made it. We watched the live feed of the battle." He shook his head in exasperation. "What assistance can we provide?" I glanced at the sensor readouts of the remaining CIS space forces. "We can use the negotiator when taking out those battle wagons. You have 72 bombers, right?" "That's right. Also 42 torrents and the rest of the ground units of the 221st. I can definitely use that. Besides, we might need your boys for those 6 freighters. While lightly armed and shielded, they may have locals on board. A smart thing to do would have been to get those big fat targets out of the battle zone. Here is what we are going to do. =RK Assault Ship Dauntless, approaching CIS blockade of Ryloth. Admiral Yularen, who had insisted on taking command over the force which would deal with the remaining vultures, had taken his flag to the Dauntless. Meanwhile, the main body of the fleet with more than half of the remaining escorts was under the command of General Vale and Commodore Palion, who were coordinating battlefield the last half hour. The mostly intact Venottas had taken pounding, while they dueled with the 2 battleships. That at least had proved to all that the remaining CIS forces were under the command of droids, not particularly bright ones too. Any commander worth his salt would have concentrated on the disabled Republic cruisers, denying their further use to the enemy. It wasn't like the 3 Venottas still retaining most of their heavy weapons could deplete the massive shields of the battleships any time. Was a mistake the Separatists would regret. The Dauntless, Warspite, and Honor, bracketed by their escorts, which consisted by the light ships with the best captains and crew, executed a tactical jump a short distance outside of effective missile range of the remaining escorts, tightened their formation around their charges, and the Republic ship moved slowly forward. "Open fire," ordered Yularen. By the time the order came, the Guardian systems had scanned the enemy fleet, shared data and assigned targets for their weapons. Missiles jumped from their VLS launchers and raced towards their prey. At the same time, the surviving and rearmed Torrents, which were reconstituted in makeshift squadrons after the brutal mauling they suffered during the previous engagements of the battle, emerged out of hyperspace behind the Republic flotilla attacking the Vultures. An organic commander might have decided that cutting out his losses and getting away might be the prudent thing to do, especially when he figured out that his remaining fighters were going to be droids in charge of the Cis fleet's remnants had other ideas. Their orders were to defeat the Republic fleet, so that was what they were going to do. Or at least try. The Vultures were ordered to soften up the attacking force, while the battleships maneuvered to get better firing angles at the new contacts which were well into their engagement envelopes. Over Ryloth, hundreds of short-lived stars could be seen appearing and blinking out of existence. For a second time the Guardian systems proved their worth, reaping a frightful harvest from the enemy fighters. The Torrents flew above the Republic formation and headed towards their Cis equivalents, ready to salvo their own missiles in a repeat of the earlier harassing tactic used by their brethren. Before the V-19s engaged within gun range, the Vultures were cut almost in half, demonstrating for all to see the great disadvantage the droid had. It was their glaring lack of longer-ranged weaponry than their built-in laser cannons. The missile strike sent by the Republic's small craft shattered what was left by the enemy squadrons, before the Torrents looped to the side, leaving the tattered remnants of the once 2,000-strong force to smash against the fire of 11 Carracks and the AA guns of the Acclamators. Before the surviving Vultures could ram the 3 assault ships, the V-19s fell over them like a hammer, sending a second salvo at their tails. This time the enemy craft had not built in enough speed to escape the Torrents' engagement envelope before striking the fleet. Only 11 droid fighters were lucky enough to kamikaze the Republic ships, none of which hit a critical location. The Acclamators could manage well enough without couple of heavy guns and few missing AA emplacements, especially now, when the Cis fighter force was gone. The battle for Ryloth, its space component, will enter the history as the point when both starfighter and bomber doctrines had to change. The widespread use of the Guardian system by the Republic and the defense net introduced by the Confederation of Independent Systems 2 months later, which was based on stolen Guardian plans, would change the face of naval warfare during the next year of the conflict known as the Clone Wars. Extract from Naval Warfare History Volume 28, published by the Axxanis Military Academy. =RK=, Red Squadron, 71st Bomber Wing, Cis blockade over Ryloth. Lieutenant FLK 256, who was usually called Falk, pushed to level and his Y-wing jumped out of hyperspace. He glanced at his sensors readouts, confirming that his craft was at the correct coordinates, and that the surviving bombers from Hammer Flight were around him. "Let's do it once again, boys," he said in his comm unit. In the next moment Falk forced his bird's engines, and the Y-wing flew forward, accelerating towards its target. The battleship grew closer, its lighter guns opening fire at the scratch force heading its way. The 41 bombers, all that survived the initial anti-shipping strike, hurled themselves at the of the lieutenant's craft were obliterated by laser cannons while closing to the huge Luckree hulk. The rest of his scratch force started near the behemoth's hull, sending proton torpedoes and energy blasts at vulnerable areas. The heavy turbo laser guns were singled out with extreme prejudice, each receiving a warhead or two, turning them in so much flaming confetti. Secondary targets were the lighter anti-ship guns and AA weapons, which were struck with the Y-wing's cannons or the odd the bombers finished their attack run. They pulled away from their burning target, and jumped into hyperspace, evading the impotent fire from the crippled Leviathan and its sister ship. At the same time, the 72 bombers which rode out the battle in the safety of negotiators' hangars, jumped near the other battle wagon. They repeated the exercise, delivering even more damage to the second both bomber forces left the battlefield. They left behind 15 of their number, and 2 crippled capital ships. Meanwhile, all Republic warships capable of it moved into weapon range of the 2 ships, and continued to bombard the battleships. One of the Acclamators was moderately damaged. A Venator, Coruscant's Pride, received additional light damage, and 3 escorts were mission killed. One unfortunate Carrack, which was mauled by a damaged heavy turbo laser cannon, which was brought back online at precisely the wrong time, and a pair of CR-90. Before Wat Tambor, who was the senior Confed leader on Ryloth, finally gave the retreat order, only one heavily damaged battleship managed to fight its way through the Republic fleet which was tearing the behemoths down piece by piece. Its fellow Mountain of Steel wasn't so fortunate. It took another 15 minutes for the depleted Republic ships to pound it into impotence, and then, what was presumed to be its droid commander, scuttled the vessel instead of letting it fall into enemy blockade of Ryloth was over, at a heavy price for both paths to the planet and all the Cis forces waiting there was now open. =RK=, Cruiser Requiem, Task Force Retribution flagship. Confirm that, exclaimed Palion. I looked inquisitively at his reaction. I was in the other side of the bridge, going over the list of lost ships. Too many of the ships under my command had been lost. I cursed my arrogance. Despite their huge number, I didn't truly believe that the Vulture swarm could be a serious threat for my capital ships, besides their obvious exposed bridges. I was proven wrong. Smashed escorts, destroyed weapons, shattered armor, not to mention the lost lives. The list was long. The two heavy ships what were lost with all hands, to the only force knows what freak combination of circumstances, only added salt to the wound. I glanced at one of the close-by monitors, which was showing the sorry state of the Executrix. She was powerful ship, that much she had proven. However, being taken out by fighters, something her designers were swearing won't be possible. Hey. I knew better when I attached her to my fleet. Her heavy firepower and the 300 torrents she carried were a good enough reason why I was glad for her presence, despite the fact that now Executrix was a yard job. She won't see combat for months, perhaps a year. Still, she was in far better shape than the enemy battleship that escaped. That thing might have to be scrapped. I returned my attention to my, friend, Gilad. And wasn't this an admission I was reluctant to make? He came to my side with a grim expression on his face. Admiral Yularan has a report for you, sir. He reported. I suppressed a grimace and nodded. What is it, Commodore? The freighters were scanned by both fighters and recon corvettes, to confirm it. There are nearly 250,000 life signs between them. Slaves, I hissed. Before I could place my fury back under control, the air around me rippled with a wave of telekinetic energy, which caused Palion to flinch. Further, all our hails for surrender remain unanswered. I thought for a moment. If those are stock freighters, then we have their schematics. I want their hyperdrives taken out. I'll speak with General Kenobi and we'll figure out how to capture those ships. It's time for the ground forces to start liberating Ryloth at any rate. We'll just have to add this to the list. =RK=, Republican Cis losses during the battle for Ryloth. Task Force Retribution. Vinotas. 3 destroyed, Defender, Redeemer, Undran. Relentless, Conviction, Coruscant's Pride, and Requiem. Destroyed bridge towers, moderate to heavy damage over armor and weapon systems. Victory, intact bridge but lost 90% of her weapons. Dreadnoughts, 2 destroyed, 4 crippled. Acclamators, Leveler, victorious, lost. Warspite, moderately damaged. Kerax CL, 9 destroyed, 4 crippled, 6 moderately damaged. Aquitans CL, 8 destroyed, 1 crippled, 3 moderately damaged. PLC-27 escort carriers, 1 destroyed, remember Coruscant. CR-90, 19 destroyed, 4 moderately damaged. V-19 Torrent, 1,578 lost. Y-Wing bombers, 488 lost. Cis losses. Luckrey Hulk command ships, 1 lost. Bakura. Luckrey Hulk battleships, 2 lost, 1 crippled and fled to hyperspace. Munificent frigates, 40 lost. Vulture fighters, 12,000 lost. Storm of Blood and Steel. =RK=, Part 4. Republic Cruiser Requiem, Task Force Retribution flagship, 1 light second from Ryloth. Disabling the hyperdrives and engines of the 6 freighters, turned out to be the first damn thing that went right today. After that, Admiral Yularan used the ships under his command to systematically dismantle the light weapons on those transports. Despite that, the calls for surrender remained unheeded. That was one of the reasons for the conference call I was attending. Skywalker, a banged-up, but otherwise fine Ahsoka, Lieutenant Veers, Kat and me. Those were the people physically present on Requiem. The rest, amongst who were General Kenobi, Commander Cody, Captain Rex and myriad other ground commanders, were here in the form of ghostly holograms. "This smells like a trap, sir," grunted Cody. There were nods and whispers of agreement. That much is obvious. However, We can't just leave those people, if they are in fact locals, in the hands of the Sis and the Huts. We have to at least scout the freighters. I shrugged. Every moment we wait, is one more for the Seps on the ground to dig in, sir, said Rex. That's right. We afford to waste too much time, sir. Cody backed up his friend. We have at least few hours. I countered. No one is setting a foot on Ryloth until orbital reconnaissance is completed. As we speak, our remaining bombers are being refitted with sensor pods. In an hour or so they will overfly the planet and scout for concentration of enemy forces and suitable landing zones. I'm not sending you down there before we're reasonably sure that there aren't any anti-orbital emplacements. The ground commanders winced at that. I didn't have to tell them what would happen if we attempted landing against an unsuppressed AA defense net, especially if the Confeds had deployed weapons which could maul the assault ships. We can use our recon elements to check the freighters. Unfortunately, there are no special forces teams attached to our army, proposed Kenobi. We should lead the reconnaissance of the freighters, said Anakin. With the Force, we would have a better chance to sense and avoid any traps. It's tempting. I nodded. Granted, the whole setup could be a trap for Jedi, but that didn't make Skywalker's idea any less viable. While we were all high-ranking officers, thanks to the Force, often the best effect we could have during a battle was on the front lines, taking out critical objectives, or plugging the gaps when our subordinates simply didn't possess the best skills for a given job. Just like now. Clearing out the freighters was a task tailor-made for the Republic commandos. Too bad that none of those fellas was under my command. Admiral Yularen will take command of the fleet, and you, General Kenobi, will plan the initial landings when the scouts' reports come in. The rest of us, Force adepts, will lead a reconnaissance in force on the freighters. Let's see what we have to work with. RK equals. LART gunship en route to Phantom 1, Luckery Hulk-class freighter, high orbit over Ryloth. I shared a troop transport with my new apprentice, who I felt would be useful in the coming battles. She did prove her combat skills in the temple. The other notable people riding with us were Captain Cat, who I had promoted when he recovered from the injuries received on Naboo, and members of his sword company. All of them were wearing the new color scheme on their armors, black and dark gray. I was the sole exception, with my apparel covered by the chameleon paint, which made me almost melt into the background. A company strength force was being deployed to each freighter. The first 4 ships were going to be hit by units under the command of Skywalker, Ahsoka, Rex and me, with the remaining being visited by recon elements of 93rd Legion. We breached the freighter's exterior through the tears in its hull made by the fleet, while my ships were taking out its weapons. The LART's pilots parked the transport so it almost touched the hull and we piled out of it. Our magnetized boots slapped into the metal skin of the freighter and we made our way to the hole in it. After a moment of tense waiting, while I checked the compartment we were about to enter and those surrounding it, with the Force, I was the first to vault in. I braced myself for the moment the artificial gravity was about to catch me. My stomach protested when the apparent lack of up and down was no more and I felt like being on solid ground once again. I hurried to move out so the next person could come in. That was Arya, who was spoiling for a fight. Being sealed in her room during the battle had made her on edge, and she needed something to bleed off her nervous energy. I was ready to bet that we would soon meet some droids which fit that bill. Soon enough, Cat and 2 squads had jumped in. The rest of the platoon had chosen other points of ingress. I nodded at the sealed armored door at the left side of the corridor where we were. Cat pointed at it and one of his men hurried up to a panel next to it. He pulled out a cable from the oversized computer mounted on his left arm, connected it with the door's control and started typing. 30 seconds later, the armored barrier blocking our way divided in 4 and slid into the walls. If we were lucky, his brief hack had gone unnoticed and we were under the radar. That is, if no one saw our gunships approaching the Luckery Hulk. The assault made by Yularen had slagged all the sensors possessed by the 6 freighters, so we didn't have to worry that they would detect our approach that way. We went into the next section of the corridor, and the tech sealed the door behind us. We could hear the hissing sound of air being pumped into the compartment. Soon a green light blinked on the door in front of us and it slid open. That would hasten our mission, at least until someone on the other side smartened up and put the ship on lockdown. Something that I expected to be done by now. The strangest thing was that I didn't feel any more danger than any other time I was entering a potential combat zone. I would have expected a stronger warning through the force if the freighter was about to blow up or something. "This is Unit Delta. We have contact," came over the comms. "Only light clankers so far. We are proceeding to the target coordinates. Their destination were the starboard cargo holds, with Gamma going after the port ones. Beta was heading straight to the reactor, to secure. My own team was making its way to the bridge, and hopefully some answers. The next clue, besides the very light resistance, and radio silence from the ship, that something was wrong, were the destroyed droids and few Trandosian bodies we started encountering. It gave me a clue about what might have happened on the freighters. "This is Gamma, we are under attack by what appears to be mercenaries, sir," reported an incredulous clone. We were nearing the bridge when Beta reported. "Sir, we stumbled on a firefight between clankers and a squad strong Trandosians. Please advise on how to proceed. Try finding an alternative route. If that's not practical, wait for them to weaken each other, eliminate all resistance and secure that reactor," I ordered. "Wilco, sir," answered the clone, before cutting the transmission. =Arche equals Phantom 2, high orbit over Ryloth. Criffing Hut spawn. Cursed Anakin, after he ducked his head back behind the corner, around which he was glancing. A damn big, heavily armed and armored Trandosian was sweeping the corridor leading to the engineering, with an oversized automatic weapon. The gun was shooting huge slugs at a prodigious rate of fire. Skywalker doubted that most pieces of the armor he and his men were wearing could stop those bullets. The standard Phase 1 Republic armor was optimized for stopping blaster fire and shrapnel. That heavy gun was something else entirely. So it was a very good thing that the fool who was blocking his way was fond of wearing grenades on his harness. Anakin smiled thinly, closed his eyes and concentrated. One after another, the safeties of the grenades carried by the Trandosian heavy weapons specialists were pulled out by invisible fingers. The huge reptilian stared at his harness when a small motion there caught his attention. He growled loudly in protest when he saw what was happening. The man let his weapon fall to the ground and frantically grabbed at the grenades. It was too late. He was just extending his right hand to throw away the first of the live explosive devices, when they detonated. When the smoke cleared, the biggest part left from the overgrown lizard were his feet, which were still in their armored boots and firmly planted to the ground. Anakin wasted no time and led 2 squads of the 501st into the reactor control room. There they were met by 6 more, thankfully relatively lightly armored Trandosians. Still, those things proved to be not only better armored from his clone troopers, but also tougher, more resilient to punishment. Skywalker's soldiers had to put a score or more shots at the Trandosians' chests in order to put them down. In contrast, a clone could tank only a hit or 2 in the torso before being taken out. Anakin found out that the enemy's toughness didn't extend to lightsabers. He deflected 6 shots back at the closest ugly lizard, without the criffing thing even wavering. But then he was in melee range. Skywalker sliced the blaster rifle carried by the Trandosian in 2 and stabbed at its chest. That finally proved too much. The male lizard growled weakly before sliding to the floor in 2 pieces. Anakin pulled towards himself a second enemy, one who was taking pot shots at his men, and impaled him on his lightsaber. Despite that, the Trandosian tried to club the Jedi with his gun. In answer, Skywalker's hands blurred while he cut the damn things to pieces of steaming flesh. For a moment a smile of fierce joy stretched his lips, before the general returned to his mission. He threw his saber at the last still standing Trandosian. The brute fell to the ground under a hail of blaster bolts and without his head. "Secure the reactor and take care of the wounded," ordered Skywalker. They had to make sure that the ship wouldn't be blown up around them. Arche equals Phantom 3, high orbit over Ryloth. Ahsoka cut vertically into the last super battle droid blocking her way. With the last obstacle between her and the door to the port cargo base gone, she ran forward, followed by 5 clones. The rest of her team were either down or tending to the wounded. She reached the door and frowned. A stray shot had slagged the control panel. That would slow her down for a few seconds. She plunged her lightsaber into the door and started cutting through the alloy. It took her seconds to do it, showing that the entrance was sealed by a regular metal and not reinforced one. It was another thing confirming that the freighters were almost unmodified, stock designs. The Padawan used telekinesis to push in the circle she cut into the door. Ahsoka jumped through the glowing hole, with her saber raised in a defensive stance. Her men followed suit. They had their weapons up and were sweeping the compartment for threats. Instead they found people sealed into large cells. Men, women and children were stuck in huge numbers behind thick metal bars. They all looked dirty and malnourished. Ahsoka stared with pity at the sight. If it wasn't for her sealed helmet, she was sure that the stench of filth in the cargo bay would be unbearable. "We need help over here," muttered one of the clones. His tone betrayed his disbelief at the sight. None of them, besides being veterans of months of war, expected to see such a sight. It was especially hard on the young Jedi. She knew that slavery was outlawed in the Republic, so the view of thousands of people in such a state was almost incomprehensible. However, for her it was worse. The Jedi, who were supposed to be protectors of the galaxy, usually didn't work outside of Republic space. And the sight before her was undeniable evidence that out there, in the Outer Rim, the slavery was well and prospering. Why did the Jedi Order allow such a thing to happen anywhere in the galaxy? If they had done their jobs. Ahsoka shook her head. She didn't have time for what-ifs right now. There were people needing immediate help. She came out of her stupor and started snapping orders. "Is the reactor secure? Check all cargo compartments for booby traps. And call in the medics. We need more people in here. Now." Similar dramas were happening in the cargo bays of all 6 freighters. == Phantom 1, high orbit over Ryloth. The news of tens of thousands enslaved people on board, as well as on the other ships, who were kept in appalling conditions, did nothing to improve my mood, which had been taking a dive ever since the battle started. In contrast, was the cheer, which was positively leaking from Arya, who was enjoying herself. She was busy dismantling battle droids using her saber and telekinesis. The Cis forces were either able to retain control of the bridge or retook it before our arrival, because we found it defending by a platoon of robots. That was barely enough to slow us down. The droids ended being either cut to pieces or blasted apart by Cat and his men. When the last machine defending our target was destroyed, Arya and me started cutting through the armored doors leading to the bridge. It took us time to melt through the nearly a meter-thick blast doors, but it was done nonetheless. We used the Force to sweep the molten metal away from our path and then we stormed the bridge. It was anticlimactic. The command center was badly torn up from combat. Its floor was littered with the chassis of destroyed machines, bodies of Trandoshans, humanoids in full armor, hiding their features. There were few Neimoidians, laying around, one of whom was still alive. I walked to the still-breathing man, who turned out to be the skipper. His chest was opened by a heavy slug, and he didn't have much more to live. To be honest, I was surprised that he hadn't joined the rest of the corpses. I knelt next to him, and pulled out a med pack. I retrieved a large bandage which I pressed over his wound, in an attempt to slow down whatever blood he still had from leaking, and used the Force to pick up a vial with a universal stimulant. I plunged it into his neck and he shuddered as the adrenaline derivative, which I was pretty sure worked almost the same way for his species too, kicked off. The plan was to keep him alive until I could get what I needed from his mind. He moaned, when my mental probe hit his defenses. To my surprise, he had unusual natural shields. In his state, the shock from me breaching his defenses would kill him before I could learn anything. "Captain, tell me what happened over here." He was interrupted by a fit of coughing, which caused him to spit blood all over the front of my armor. "The Hutt mercenaries wanted the leave the instant your fleet arrived. But half my crew is still down there." He coughed more blood. "I didn't want to leave them to your mercy. Not after what we were forced. The Trade Federation, those Criffing." The captain convulsed and his eyes rolled in his sockets before he went still. I frowned at the cooling corpse in my hands. His regret about whatever he did was genuine. Either the captain was the first Neimoidian with consciousness I've met, or whatever he did was so much beyond the pale that it had shocked him to the core. The second possibility had unpleasant repercussions about what we were about to find on Ryloth. Interlude 03, Inspiration =RK=, rows upon rows of Republic troopers, clad in dark grey and black armor, are marching in formation up the ramps of Acclamator assault ships. They are flanked by lines of ATT walkers and hover tanks, waiting for their turn to board. In mere hours, we will step foot on Ryloth. Our path has been cleared by the valiant sacrifices of our brothers and sisters in the Navy. Venator cruisers are locked in a long-range duel with 5 times their number of separatist frigates. The space between them blazes with blue and scarlet turbo-laser bolts. Hundreds of torrent fighters are fearlessly flying to meet a wall of vultures, which are descending to pick apart the Republic fleet. We will not let their noble deaths and the achievements paid with them be in vain. Images from the cameras built into the Y-wings show how squadrons of the bombers fall upon munificence, which shatter under their torpedoes. It could be seen how Republic small craft are picked apart by AA fire or vultures which were close enough to engage them. Yet the bombers press through the hellish onslaught and strike a CIS command ship, which is left as a wreck in the aftermath of their attack. I won't lie to you. We are going into battle against a tough and unrelenting enemy. One who has no concept of mercy. Droids marching across 100 worlds could be seen. The machines are shown shooting at both Republic troopers and more often than not, at unarmed civilians, who were at the wrong place in the wrong time. Wounded clones, as well as members of scores of planetary defense forces, were being dispatched by the Steel Legions. As for their masters on the Separatist Council, the well-known face of General Vale was twisted by a sneer. We all saw what their questionable sense of mercy entails. Video captured by the helmet cameras of clone troopers followed. Large cells were shown, each of which were filled with gaunt men, women and children. Many of them were wearing rags, which did little to hide a multitude of bruises. Or the old-fashioned slave collars that were clamped around the necks of about a third of those poor people. Here, in orbit of Ryloth, we saw the true face of the Separatists. They want the rest of the galaxy under their steel heels, and demonstrated what awaits every one of us if they win this war. It's either a clean death in battle or a protracted one as a wretched slave. Short clips taken by high-altitude reconnaissance vessels were shown next. Camps filled with countless Twi'leks could be seen. They were gathered behind high fences like a herd of animals. Most of them didn't have even a flap of tent over their heads. In many parts of Ryloth, especially near the deserts, such a treatment would prove to be a death sentence. I can't promise that I'll bring every single one of you back alive. We all know that some of you who are today, here with me, won't be alive at the same time tomorrow. The general took a deep breath before continuing. They at least will die free. Let us show the galaxy what we are made of. Today we fight for the freedom which is yours by right. Today we liberate Ryloth. Squadrons of fighters and bombers scream from the heavens, plunging through the atmosphere of Ryloth as so many falling stars. They are followed in by Corellian corvettes, and finally the dagger-shaped assault ships. Waves of gunships carrying men and equipment separated from the acclimators and headed to the predetermined staging area. High in orbit, 2 Venator cruisers maneuver and unleash barrage after barrage of turbo-laser death at exposed enemy formations. Recon craft show columns of separatist vehicles disappearing in blinding flashes as the orbital bombardment hits. By now, every single Republic citizen knows what our enemies are capable of. What awaits us if we ever fall into the Separatists' clutches. Even now some are calling for peace. Let us be fair, the choice between war and peace is an easy one. There is only one sure way to guarantee that there is peace, and it takes only a second. It's a surrender. On Ryloth we saw what a surrender will mean for the Republic. It is enslavement for every man, woman and child. There can be no more appeasement with the Separatists. No more compromises. We are long past between the choice between peace and war. Now there can be only fighting or surrender. It is clear what will happen to us all if we continue to back off and retreat. The only accommodation the Separatists will accept is the steel heels of their soulless armies over our necks. The Separatist leaders believe that their victory is near after they struck at the very heart of the Republic. They believe that we are morally and economically weakened, because even now there are voices from our side who call for peace at any price. Those people would see us begging on our knees before a separatist slave master instead dying on our feet. They do not speak for us all. They do not speak for the Republic. For more than 20 millennia, the freedom of the Republic citizens has been purchased with countless noble deaths. Those men and women did not die in vain. Peace is too precious to be bought at the price of slavery. As I speak, the Grand Army of the Republic is fighting across thousands of planets to stop the separatist onslaught. They fight and die for every single one of you. Can any of you do any less for your own freedom? The Republic Army and Navy need your help to turn the tide. Enlist now, and help us stop the separatists once and for all.